What I'm about to share is going to sound absolutely impossible, but I need you to hear me out. 6 nights ago, I had the most profound encounter with Jesus about a question that has tormented my heart for years. Why does God allow some people to be born into crushing poverty while others are born into abundance? What he revealed to me about divine justice, human suffering, and the hidden purposes behind earthly circumstances didn't just surprise me, it completely transformed how I see every homeless person, every struggling family, every person born into disadvantage. But before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps give me the strength to speak my truth. Now let's get into my story. I'm sitting here on a weathered park bench in downtown Los Angeles, just a few blocks from Skid Row, where thousands of our most vulnerable neighbors live on the streets. Behind me, you can probably hear the distant hum of traffic, the occasional siren, the sounds of a city where wealth and poverty exist side by side in the starkest possible contrast. I chose to share this message from here, in the heart of where this question has been burning in my soul, because there's something about being surrounded by the reality of human suffering that makes you desperate for divine answers. The morning sun is casting long shadows across the concrete, and I've been watching people walk by for the past hour. Business executives in expensive suits heading to their offices, homeless individuals pushing shopping carts filled with their only possessions, tourists with designer bags stepping carefully around those sleeping on the sidewalks. The inequality is so stark, so visible, that it forces you to confront questions that comfortable theology often avoids. To understand why this revelation meant so much to me, I need to take you back to what happened 3 months ago when I was filming some of the most challenging scenes we've ever attempted for The Chosen. We were portraying Jesus' ministry among the poor, the sick, the outcasts of society, and between takes, I found myself walking through actual homeless encampments that had grown around our filming locations. I'll never forget this one moment when I was still in costume as Jesus, and a homeless woman approached me thinking I might be able to help her. She looked into my eyes and said, "Sir, can you tell me why God made me this way? I've been poor my whole life, sick since I was a child, and I just want to know why he would create someone like me only to suffer." Standing there dressed as the Son of God, with this woman's desperate question echoing in my heart, I realized I had no answer that satisfied either her need or my own understanding of divine love. I gave her what money I had, but her question haunted me for weeks afterward. That encounter forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding my entire spiritual life, the uncomfortable reality that some people seem to be born into circumstances that virtually guarantee suffering, struggle, and disadvantage, while others are born into families with resources, opportunities, and every advantage life can offer. As someone who has been blessed with success, with a platform, with opportunities I never dreamed possible, I've struggled with what feels like survivor's guilt. Why was I born into a middle-class family with loving parents who supported my dreams? Why did I get the chances that led to playing Jesus on a show that's touched millions? What makes me more deserving than that homeless woman who suffered her entire life? The question became even more pressing during season 6 filming, when we shot several episodes dealing with Jesus' teachings about the poor, the marginalized, the forgotten members of society. As I portrayed Christ speaking about God's love for the least of these, I wrestled with the contradiction between divine love and earthly inequality. If God really loves everyone equally, why doesn't he intervene to prevent children from being born into poverty? If he has the power to change circumstances, why do some people struggle for basic necessities while others have more than they could ever use? How can we talk about God's justice when the most innocent children suffer through no fault of their own? These questions weren't just theological curiosities for me. They were keeping me awake at night, affecting my prayer life, making it difficult to portray Jesus with authenticity when I couldn't reconcile his teachings about divine love with the harsh realities I was witnessing daily. The breakthrough came 2 weeks ago during a particularly difficult day of filming. We were shooting a scene where Jesus encounters a blind beggar, and between takes, I walked away from the set to get some air. Just outside our location, I saw a family, a mother with 3 young children, sitting on the sidewalk with a cardboard sign, asking for help. The children couldn't have been older than 5, 7, and 9 years old. They were clean, well-behaved, clearly loved by their mother, but they were living in their car and asking strangers for enough money to buy food. Looking at those innocent faces, I felt something break open in my chest, a mixture of heartbreak, rage, and desperate confusion about how God could allow such circumstances. That night, I drove up into the hills above the city where I often go to pray when I need to hear from God clearly. But instead of my usual quiet spot, I felt led to a different location. an overlook where you can see the entire sprawl of Los Angeles spread out below you. The city lights stretched endlessly in every direction, and I found myself thinking about how each light represented someone's life, someone's story, someone's struggles and dreams. I sat there on a concrete retaining wall overlooking this vast sea of humanity and poured out my heart to God with more desperation than I'd ever felt about any question. "Jesus," I said aloud, my voice echoing across the empty overlook. "I need to understand why you allow some people to be born into poverty while others have every advantage. I need to know how this reflects your love and justice, because right now, it looks like cosmic unfairness that I can't reconcile with who you say you are." The city sprawled below me like a living map of inequality, the bright lights of wealthy neighborhoods contrasting sharply with the dimmer areas where the poor struggled just to survive. From that vantage point, I could almost visualize the stories playing out in millions of homes, children going to bed hungry, while others had more food than they could eat, families being evicted while others owned multiple properties, people working multiple jobs just to afford basic health care while others took luxury for granted. I prayed until I was emotionally exhausted, confessing my own comfort and privilege while begging for understanding about divine justice. Why was I born into circumstances that led to success while that woman on the street was born into circumstances that led to homelessness? What makes the difference? How is that fair? How is that love? As I sat there in the pre-dawn darkness, overlooking a city where such stark inequality exists side by side, I felt this growing sense that God was about to answer my desperate questions in a way that would change everything I thought I knew about His justice, His love, and His purposes for human suffering. The city lights below began to blur as tears filled my eyes, and I knew I was on the verge of receiving revelation that would either comfort my heart or completely shatter my understanding of God's character. Either way, I was desperate enough to ask the hardest questions and trust Him with whatever answers He chose to give. "Please," I whispered into the night air, "show me your heart for the poor, for those born into disadvantage, for the children who suffer through no choice of their own. Help me understand how this reflects your love, because I need to know that you're not indifferent to human suffering. I need to know that there's purpose behind the pain I see everywhere." What happened next was the most profound spiritual encounter I've ever experienced, one that would not only answer my desperate questions but reveal divine purposes hidden behind earthly circumstances that most of us never consider. As the first hints of dawn began to appear on the horizon, painting the sky in soft pastels above the sprawling city, the atmosphere around me began to change in ways I'd never experienced before. The noise of the distant city seemed to fade until there was only silence and this overwhelming sense of divine presence settling over the entire overlook. Then, in what felt like both an instant and eternity, I found myself transported into a spiritual realm where I could see reality from God's perspective. The city below was still visible, but now I could perceive the spiritual dimensions behind physical circumstances, the eternal purposes hidden within temporary suffering, the divine love at work, even in the most heartbreaking situations. Jesus appeared beside me on that overlook, but His expression wasn't what I expected. Instead of the gentle compassion I was used to, His face showed a complex mixture of deep sorrow for human suffering and unshakable confidence in divine purposes that human understanding couldn't fully grasp. "Jonathan," He said, and His voice carried both the authority of the Creator and the tenderness of someone who intimately knows every human struggle. "You've been asking the right questions, but you've been thinking about them from an earthly perspective. What I'm about to show you will challenge everything you believe about fairness, justice, and the purposes behind human circumstances." As He spoke, I could feel decades of confusion and spiritual wrestling beginning to focus into this moment of potential understanding. I was about to receive answers to questions that had tormented not just me, but every person who had ever looked at suffering and wondered where God was in the midst of it. "Are you ready to see why some souls choose to be born into poverty?" Jesus asked, His words hitting me like lightning. "Because what you're about to learn will transform how you see every homeless person, every struggling family, every person born into disadvantage. The truth about earthly circumstances and eternal purposes is more beautiful and more complex than you've ever imagined." I nodded, feeling both terrified and hopeful about what I was about to discover. I knew I was on the verge of receiving revelation that would either heal my questions about divine justice or completely transform my understanding of how God works in human history. As Jesus and I stood on that spiritual overlook above the city, the environment around us began to shift in ways that challenged my understanding of reality itself. The physical Los Angeles remained visible below, but now I could perceive layers of spiritual truth underlying every human circumstance. every story of struggle and abundance playing out in the millions of lives spread across the urban landscape. "Jonathan," Jesus said, his voice carrying both infinite compassion and divine authority, "what I'm about to show you will challenge your earthly understanding of fairness, but it will reveal the eternal purposes behind circumstances that seem random or cruel from a human perspective." As he spoke, I began to see something that took my breath away. Souls in a realm before earthly birth, engaged in what appeared to be profound conversations with divine beings about the lives they were about to live. These weren't forced assignments, but choices being made with full understanding of the spiritual purposes behind earthly circumstances. "The first truth you must understand," Jesus began, "is that souls are not randomly assigned to earthly circumstances. Before birth, in my Father's presence, souls participate in choosing the experiences that will best serve their spiritual growth and their ability to serve divine purposes on earth." The revelation was staggering. I watched as souls examined different potential life paths, understanding the challenges and opportunities each would provide. Some chose lives of material abundance but greater spiritual testing. Others chose lives of material poverty but rich opportunities for spiritual development and service. "Watch this soul," Jesus said, directing my attention to a being of light contemplating two possible earthly paths. She can be born into a wealthy family where she would have every material advantage but face the spiritual dangers of entitlement, materialism, and disconnect from human suffering. Or she can be born into poverty where she would face physical hardship but develop compassion, resilience, and deep empathy for others. I watched in amazement as this soul chose the more challenging path, not out of punishment or randomness, but out of love. Love for her own spiritual growth, and love for the people she would serve more effectively, having experienced struggle herself. "But Jesus," I said, struggling to process what I was seeing, "what about children who suffer? What about those who die young in poverty? How can that be a choice?" His expression filled with profound tenderness. "Come, let me show you something that will break your heart with its beauty." The scene shifted, and I saw souls who had chosen brief earthly lives filled with suffering, but their purposes were revealed to be profound beyond human comprehension. A child born with severe disabilities, whose very existence would teach an entire family about unconditional love. A baby who would live only days, but whose brief life would inspire medical breakthroughs that would save thousands of others. "These souls are among the most courageous in my kingdom," Jesus explained, his voice thick with emotion. "They choose the hardest assignments because they understand that their suffering serves purposes far greater than their individual comfort. They are heroes, not victims." The second truth he revealed was even more profound. Poverty is not punishment, it is often assignment. Many souls specifically choose lives of material limitation because they understand that struggle develops qualities that abundance cannot. Resilience, creativity, empathy, dependence on divine provision, and the ability to find joy in simple things. I watched as he showed me countless examples throughout history, souls who had chosen poverty and used it as a catalyst for extraordinary spiritual development, innovation born from necessity, and compassion that could only come from personal understanding of need. "Look at my own earthly life," Jesus said. "I could have been born into any circumstances, but I chose to be born in a stable, raised by a carpenter, to live among the poor and marginalized. This wasn't because poverty is holy in itself, but because it was the best environment for my mission and for demonstrating that divine love exists independent of material circumstances." The third truth shattered my understanding of divine justice. What you call inequality is often divine strategy. The wealthy and the poor need each other for spiritual completion. The poor teach the rich about humility, generosity, and gratitude. The rich provide the poor with opportunities for service and resources for survival. When both groups fulfill their spiritual assignments, the system works as intended. I began to see the intricate spiritual ecosystem underlying economic systems. Souls choosing different roles not based on worthiness or punishment, but based on what would best serve their growth and the collective good of humanity. "But what about systemic injustice?" I asked. "What about oppression and exploitation?" Jesus' expression grew serious. "Free will allows humans to distort my design. When the wealthy choose greed over generosity, when systems oppress rather than serve, when people forget their spiritual assignments and focus only on earthly accumulation, this creates suffering beyond what souls intended to experience." He showed me the difference between poverty chosen for spiritual purposes and poverty created by human injustice. Both existed, but they served different functions in the cosmic order. The fourth truth is this: souls who choose challenging circumstances do so from a position of spiritual strength, not weakness. They volunteer for the hardest assignments because they have the capacity to handle them and transform them into spiritual gold. I watched as Jesus revealed the spiritual strength of souls who had chosen lives of struggle. They weren't victims of cosmic unfairness. They were spiritual warriors who had volunteered for the battlefield because they knew their presence would make a difference. Every homeless person you pass on the street, Jesus continued, every struggling family you encounter, every person born into disadvantage, they may be fulfilling assignments that require more courage than you can imagine. Their circumstances don't diminish their value. They reveal their spiritual heroism. The fifth truth revolutionized my understanding of human dignity. The poorest person on earth has the same eternal value as the richest, but their earthly assignment may be more important for the spiritual development of humanity. Often, the most materially limited souls are the most spiritually advanced, completing assignments that serve the entire human family. I began to see poverty not as evidence of divine neglect, but as potential evidence of divine trust, 2CO. Souls being given assignments that required great spiritual maturity to handle with grace and purpose. The sixth truth, Jesus said, his voice rising with passion, is that earthly circumstances are temporary assignments, not eternal conditions. What matters is not what happens to you, but how you respond to what happens to you. A soul can graduate from poverty to spiritual wealth, or from material abundance to spiritual poverty, based entirely on their choices. He showed me souls who had transformed their challenging circumstances into spiritual victories, and others who had squandered abundant circumstances through selfish choices. The external conditions mattered far less than the internal responses. And the seventh truth, Jesus concluded, is that the ultimate purpose behind all earthly circumstances, wealth, poverty, health, illness, advantage, disadvantage, is to develop the capacity for love. Every situation provides unique opportunities to love and be loved. The poor can love through gratitude and service despite having little. The rich can love through generosity and stewardship of abundance. Both paths can lead to the same destination, a heart perfected in love. As these revelations settled into my consciousness, I felt a complete transformation in how I viewed every person I'd ever encountered. The homeless woman who had questioned me while I was in costume wasn't a victim of divine unfairness. Anyone to be a spiritual hero, completing one of the most difficult assignments in the cosmic curriculum. But how do I know which poverty is chosen for spiritual purposes and which is the result of injustice? I asked, still struggling to process the implications of what I was learning. That's exactly the right question, Jesus said, his face lighting up with approval. And the answer will show you how to respond to both situations with perfect love and wisdom. I could sense that we were approaching the most practical part of this revelation, I&M, understanding how to respond to poverty and inequality in light of these eternal truths. The city spread below us seemed to pulse with new meaning, every light representing not just a life but a soul on a spiritual journey with purposes far deeper than earthly appearances suggested. As Jesus and I continued standing on that spiritual overlook above Los Angeles, the city below seemed to transform before my eyes. Where I had once seen only random inequality and apparent injustice, I now began to perceive the intricate spiritual purposes woven through every circumstance, every struggle, every story playing out in the millions of lives spread across the urban landscape. Now, Jesus said, his voice filled with both compassion and urgency, I need to show you how to respond to poverty and suffering with this new understanding. Because knowledge without action is meaningless, and understanding divine purposes without responding with love misses the entire point. The scene around us shifted, and I found myself witnessing countless interactions between those with abundance and those in need. Some responses honored the spiritual purposes behind circumstances, while others ignored or even hindered the divine design. The first principle, Jesus began, is that whether poverty is chosen for spiritual purposes or created by injustice, your response should always be love and action. You don't need to determine which type of poverty you're encountering. You need to respond to the person in front of you with compassion and practical help. I watched as he showed me examples of people responding to homelessness, unemployment, and family struggles. Those who approached each situation with genuine love and practical assistance were participating in divine purposes regardless of the underlying spiritual dynamics. When you help someone in need, Jesus explained, you're not interfering with their spiritual assignment, you're fulfilling yours. Your abundance isn't random any more than their poverty is. You were blessed with resources specifically so you could be an instrument of my love to those who need it. This reframed everything. My success, my platform, my opportunities weren't just personal blessings. They were assignments that came with responsibilities to serve others. But Jesus, I said, How do I help without creating dependency? How do I address systemic issues while honoring individual spiritual journeys? His answer was both simple and profound. Love always seeks the highest good for the beloved. Sometimes that means providing immediate relief. Sometimes it means creating opportunities for growth and self-sufficiency. Sometimes it means working to change unjust systems. Wisdom comes from understanding what each situation requires. He showed me people who had found the balance, offering immediate help while also addressing root causes, providing resources while respecting dignity, working for systemic change while serving individual needs. The second principle is this: never let understanding spiritual purposes become an excuse for inaction. Some people use the idea of chosen circumstances to justify ignoring suffering or avoiding responsibility. This is a perversion of truth that serves selfishness, not love. I saw examples of people misusing spiritual concepts to avoid helping others, claiming that intervening would interfere with someone's karmic lessons or that poverty was meant to be. Jesus' reaction to these attitudes was clearly one of disappointment and correction. My Father's heart breaks over every child who goes to bed hungry, every family living in their car, every person suffering on the streets. The fact that some souls choose challenging assignments doesn't mean I want them to suffer unnecessarily or that others should ignore their pain. The third principle transformed my understanding of stewardship. Those blessed with abundance have a sacred responsibility to use their resources as instruments of divine love. Wealth is not a reward for spiritual superiority, IMAD. It's an assignment that requires accountability to serve others. I began to see successful people who understood their wealth as a tool for blessing others, and others who had forgotten the spiritual purposes behind their abundance. The difference wasn't in how much they had, but in how they used what they'd been given. Every dollar you spend, every opportunity you receive, every platform you're given, these are sacred trusts. The question isn't whether you deserve them, but whether you're using them to serve the purposes for which they were entrusted to you. This hit me powerfully as someone with a public platform. My role on The Chosen, my ability to reach people through social media, even this message I was receiving, this fen, all of it came with the responsibility to serve divine purposes rather than just personal success. The fourth principle addresses systemic change. While individual souls may choose challenging circumstances, systems that oppress and exploit still violate my design and must be confronted. Working for justice isn't interfering with spiritual assignments. Instead, it's fulfilling them. Jesus showed me people throughout history who had worked to change unjust systems while still honoring individual dignity and spiritual purposes. They understood that fighting oppression and serving souls weren't contradictory but complementary. When systems prevent people from fulfilling their spiritual assignments, when structures create suffering beyond what souls intended to experience, when policies favor some while crushing others, this grieves my heart and requires action from those with the power to change things. The fifth principle gave me hope for transformation. Everyone, regardless of their earthly circumstances, has the potential to fulfill their spiritual assignment with dignity and purpose. Your job isn't to fix everyone's problems, but to create opportunities for people to fulfill their divine purposes. I watched as people learned to help others not just survive their circumstances, but transform them into spiritual victories, providing not just charity but opportunities, not just relief but empowerment, not just assistance but dignity. The sixth principle is about seeing with spiritual eyes. When you encounter someone in poverty, see them first as a spiritual being on a sacred assignment, then respond to their immediate needs with that understanding. This changes everything about how you interact with them. Instead of pity or condescension, I saw people responding to those in need with respect and recognition of their spiritual dignity. Instead of charity that demeans, I witnessed love that honors the divine image in every person regardless of circumstances. The seventh and most important principle, Jesus said, his voice rising with passion, is that the ultimate goal of all earthly circumstances is to develop the capacity for perfect love. Whether you're responding to poverty or experiencing it, whether you're blessed with abundance or struggling with lack, the question is always the same. How is this situation developing your ability to love and be loved? As these principles settled into my heart, I felt a complete transformation in how I would approach every encounter with human need. The homeless woman who had questioned me while I was in costume wasn't just someone to feel sorry for. She was potentially a spiritual teacher whose assignment might be more important than mine. Now, Jesus said, taking my hands in his, I want to show you what happens when people understand and live these truths. The scene around us transformed to show communities where these principles were being lived out. I saw churches that had moved beyond charity to empowerment, businesses that operated as instruments of blessing, individuals who used their resources as tools of transformation. I watched families that had been homeless finding not just shelter but dignity and purpose. I saw wealthy individuals discovering joy and generosity that transformed both giver and receiver. I witnessed systemic changes that honored both immediate needs and spiritual purposes. "This is what my kingdom looks like on earth," Jesus explained. "Not the elimination of all earthly challenges, but the transformation of all circumstances into opportunities for love. Not the end of different assignments, but the fulfillment of them with grace and purpose." The beauty of what I was witnessing brought tears to my eyes. This wasn't a utopian fantasy where everyone had equal material wealth. There was something better. It was a reality where everyone had equal spiritual dignity and opportunity to fulfill their divine assignments with support and love. "But how do I start?" I asked. "How do I live this understanding in practical ways?" Jesus smiled, and I could see he'd been waiting for exactly that question. "You start where you are, with what you have, with the people in front of you. Every encounter with need is an opportunity to participate in divine purposes. Every blessing you receive is a trust to be stewarded for others." He showed me simple, practical steps, looking into the eyes of every person asking for help and seeing their spiritual dignity, using my platform to share not just entertainment but hope and truth, supporting organizations that address both immediate needs and systemic causes, advocating for policies that honor human dignity while creating opportunities for spiritual growth. And remember, Jesus said as our time together began to wind down, your own abundance is an assignment too. The question isn't why you were blessed while others struggle. It's how you'll use your blessings to serve the purposes for which they were given. As the vision began to fade and I felt myself returning to the physical overlook above Los Angeles, Jesus spoke one final truth that would sustain me forever. Every person you encounter, regardless of their circumstances, is on a spiritual journey with purposes you may never fully understand. Your job isn't to judge their assignment or fix their life. It's to love them well and support them in fulfilling whatever divine purposes brought them to your path. I opened my eyes to find myself back on the concrete retaining wall overlooking the city, but everything had changed. The lights below no longer looked like evidence of inequality. They looked like evidence of souls fulfilling diverse assignments in service of collective spiritual growth. Over the past 6 days since this encounter, I've been living differently. When I see homeless individuals, I no longer feel just pity or guilt. I feel respect for potential spiritual heroes completing assignments I might not have the courage to accept. When I encounter families in need, I don't just see victims and ass. I see teachers who might have more to offer than I do. Just yesterday, I had lunch with a successful businessman who was struggling with guilt over his wealth. Instead of offering empty reassurance, I could share what Jesus had shown me about abundance as assignment. His wealth wasn't evidence of unfair advantage. It was a sacred trust that came with responsibilities to serve divine purposes. This morning, I volunteered at a local shelter, and the experience was completely different from past charity work. Instead of helping from a position of superiority, I served from a place of recognition that these individuals might be fulfilling spiritual assignments more important than my own entertainment career. The transformation in how I see every person, every circumstance, every opportunity to serve has been profound. This message isn't just for me. It's for everyone who has ever struggled with questions about divine justice, human suffering, and their own responsibility to those in need. Let me pray for everyone who needs this life-changing perspective. Father, thank you for revealing the spiritual purposes behind earthly circumstances that often seem unfair or random. For every person watching who has struggled with questions about poverty, inequality, and divine justice, help them see with spiritual eyes. For those blessed with abundance, show them that their resources are sacred trusts meant to serve divine purposes. Help them understand that their success is an assignment, not just a reward. Give them wisdom to use their blessings as instruments of your love. For those experiencing poverty or struggle, remind them of their spiritual dignity and the potential purposes their circumstances might serve. Help them know that their earthly conditions don't determine their eternal value or their importance in your kingdom. For everyone who encounters need, give them hearts that see spiritual dignity before material circumstances. Help them respond with love that honors the divine image in every person while addressing practical needs with wisdom and compassion. Lord, break the power of every lie that says some people matter more than others based on earthly circumstances. Help us all understand that we're spiritual beings on sacred assignments, using our diverse circumstances to develop the capacity for perfect love. Transform our communities, our systems, and our hearts so that every person can fulfill their divine purposes with dignity and support. Let this understanding move us beyond charity to empowerment, beyond pity to respect, beyond inequality to recognition of our shared spiritual destiny. Use this revelation to heal guilt, inspire action, and transform how we see every encounter with human need as an opportunity to participate in your eternal purposes. In Jesus' name, amen. If this message has touched your heart, please subscribe and share your own story in the comments. How has this understanding changed your perspective on poverty, wealth, or your own circumstances? How will you live differently, knowing that earthly conditions serve?
Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time with us today. I truly hope that this message has strengthened your faith, brought peace to your heart, and reminded you of the endless love of Jesus Christ. Whatever you may be facing right now, please remember that you are never alone. Jesus is walking beside you through every joy, every struggle, and every uncertain moment. His grace is greater than your fears. His love is stronger than your pain, and His light can guide you through even the darkest times. Keep praying, keep trusting, and place your worries in His hands. Jesus knows your heart, hears every prayer, and will give you the strength you need to keep moving forward. If this message blessed you, please share it with someone who may need hope today and subscribe to join our community. May Jesus bless you, protect your family, and fill your life with faith, love, and peace. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. God bless you.
Eternal purposes. Remember, every person you meet, regardless of their circumstances, is a spiritual being on a sacred assignment. Your job isn't to judge their journey or fix their problems, it's to love them well and support them in fulfilling whatever divine purposes brought them to your path. You are not randomly blessed or randomly struggling, you are strategically positioned to serve purposes greater than yourself. The question isn't why your circumstances are what they are, but how you'll use them to develop the capacity for perfect love that is the ultimate goal of every earthly experience.